again, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of this class. And I would like to compliment all of you for how you did in the paper. As I've also told you in my weekly email last week, I think that the paper went well. Most people got a good grade. Um, I can write more about that in the email that I'm going to send out today with these videos too, but that in general, there were only a couple of groups where communication really broke down. Everyone else pretty much collaborated. Um, and I'm looking forward to seeing your work both this week and in the following week, where you're going to have to, in the following weeks, where you're going to have to write another cooperative paper again. Okay, so very important. This week we're doing one of the most important and most misunderstood parts of political science. And that part is the part about representation, how democratic representation works. Okay, think about it in this way. In general, when we're doing democratic representation, there are two things that matter. That the people who win office, the people who become our governance, are stable and are able to get stuff done. And then on the other side, that they're able to represent the population and they don't just rule for the majority, but that the minority is also represented. And so there are three different principles of representation. The first one is the principle of majoritarian representation, which is based on the idea that whatever party or candidate that gets more votes than everyone else wins whatever office is at stake. In its most brutal conception, you don't need to have 50% of the votes, you don't need to have a majority. All you need to have is a plurality of votes. You just have to have more votes than everyone else. And that kind of system is called first past the post. It was invented by the British, and the countries that use this kind of system, which often include the United States, even if in the US things are a little more complicated, are countries that were British colonies. So Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, the United States, and a number of African and Asian countries that were UK colonies. An alternative to this is to have proportional representation. Proportional representation, as the name says it, is that you are represented in proportion to the number of votes that you get. So imagine, for example, that we are electing a city council, or that we are electing an assembly, a congress, a parliament. If there are political parties, the political party that gets 40% of votes gets 40% of the seats. There are 10 seats, they get 4. There's another political party that gets 20% of votes, they will get 20% of seats, 2 seats out of 10, for example. What's the advantage of doing this? The advantage is that even if you are a minority party, then you can get representation without actually having to win in any district. The biggest difference between these two is that normally majoritarian representation is done with small geographic districts, just like elections for the American Senate or for the American House of Representatives. You have districts. Oregon is split in a series of districts, and whoever is first in a certain district wins everything. The way that we create representation in terms of how the districts are crafted and in terms of who can be and cannot be elected, that falls under the third principle, descriptive representation. So descriptive representation is the idea that independent from political parties or candidates, there are certain rules that should be respected. Like, for example, there could be a rule that says that if in a certain region there is a certain ethnic makeup of the population, then that ethnic makeup should be represented by the candidates that are elected. Or if 50% of the population are women, there could be a rule that says that 50% of the candidates that get elected are women. Okay. Also, it's very important to understand that democracy is is shaped by three different sets of things. The number one is the rules through which we elect officials, and that's what we just talked about. Number two is the parties. How many parties, what kind of parties are competing? And number three is the offices. Where are we electing these people? How do these offices look like? The US, for example, is a presidential country. In other countries, the president is not very strong. Okay? Starting from the rules and taken from the majoritarian principle, you have the system called single member plurality. Sorry for my English. Where in every district you only elect one single politician, and it's the politician that gets the most votes. It's pretty brutal because it's winner takes all. Okay? And so the way that it works is that normally you don't have a party that is stronger than everyone else, and you assume that people on the territory have different preferences, and that, for example, in rich cities, people are going to vote for a certain party. In smaller, poorer towns, people are going to vote for another party, and so on and so forth. In general, it leads to the overrepresentation of the strong. You can see the graphs for Britain. And why does it overrepresent the strong? Because if you have a party that nationwide takes 20%, but is not on top of any other party in any part of the nation, they will get 0 seats with 20% of the total vote. Okay? And this is also why it doesn't matter that Hillary Clinton in the last election won the popular vote, because what mattered is that Trump won in more districts. Okay? The other problem with this kind of system is that it's very easy to do what is called pork barrel politics this way. Pork is the political nickname of the kind of benefits that politicians can give to their own district, so that when a politician gets elected, since they count on the votes of their district to get elected again, they will try to give as many benefits to that district as they can. Proportional representation is the other kind of system. Fairly easy to understand, as I said before. You get a percentage of votes, you get a percentage of seats. What's the problem? The problem is that it can lead to chaos if there are too many parties. Because under PR, there's no districts. And in general, you have like very big districts, like a country is divided in like 2 or 3 big districts, and every district elects 100 politicians, for example. Okay? And the idea is that since small parties can run and get elected, you have to cobble some sort of coalition afterwards. Because if no one gets 50% of the seats, no one is able to govern. Okay? And so they have to make alliances. And alliances are messy. These are the two clearest examples, but real life is different. There are adjustments. Okay? I want you to remember 2 adjustments to these systems. Number 1 adjustment is that plurality can be done with 2 rounds, which is the French electoral system, for example, which means that the 2 candidates that are on top after the first round compete in a runoff, unless someone gets 50% in the first round. Why does this matter? This matters because it means that even candidates of a smaller political party can be elected in the second round by making alliances with the other candidates that were weaker than them, and so defeat a majority candidate. Okay? The other adjustment that we can have is an adjustment to proportional representation, and it's called a threshold. It means that in order to get elected, a certain party needs to have votes over a certain threshold. In Italy, for example, historically the threshold was 4%. It means that if you get less than 4%, you get 3%, you get 2%, and so on and so forth, you don't get any seats. And that it's only people who get only parties that get 4% or more that get elected. As I've made an example about descriptive representation, about having women elected, having women candidates on the list, for example, it's one of the most common examples. Then there is another very important example, gerrymandering, What is gerrymandering? Gerrymandering is crafting a political district so that it can better represent the population, the makeup of this district. In principle, it's made so that a minority can elect its own candidate by putting together all the districts, all the neighborhoods, for example, where a certain minority lives. The problem is that this also can get used by the majority to make all districts where the minority will find itself unable to elect anybody. Okay, you can read about this. Maybe you should post an article about this because it's very interesting and it's very, very important in America today. The following part regards political parties. I'm not going to talk about this for very long, but you have to remember political parties get a very bad reputation in the US. But part of the problem here is that in the US there are only two major parties, and it's very hard with two major parties to have everybody be represented. Political parties get a bad reputation, but they are actually fundamental to the working of democracy. And if you don't like the current major political parties, maybe you should be the ones to start the change and try to see if there's a third party of some kind, no matter how small it is, that suits you better, and try to activate politically with them, either in person if they have some physical offices, or online. Parties have four main functions that you should try to remember. Number one, they are intermediaries for whatever interest we have. For example, there are people who think that minimum wage is important. They should try to incorporate this interest. There should be a party that prioritizes minimum wages if people think that this is important. Okay? Or global warming, or gun laws, and so on. There should be parties that incorporate these interests. Are there? Yes, there are. They also package voters' options. I have to stop here and record the next video.